Now to wrap things up and bring things home for our symposium on the Little Tuskegees, we have one of my favorite people, Stephanie Burks. Stephanie is Natural Sciences Chair and Biology Instructor here at Hinds, Utica, where she's taught for 10 years. Her passion for her subject area and for her students is apparent in any conversation that you have with her. She's a super strong supporter of the work here at Utica. Stephanie is heavily involved in her church. She can find an AME connection just about anywhere and with anyone. We were in New Orleans on a field trip with students. We had a busload of students and the venue canceled on us. Within 30 minutes, Stephanie had organized an entire VIP tour of Dillard for our students. We had a visit with Miss Dillard. We got a behind-the-scene lab tour. All of this happened in like 30 minutes. Stephanie's just on the phone doing her thing. She serves on the advisory board for Base Pair, which is an incredible program which pairs high school students with biomedical researchers at UMMC. And we've worked together on a number of cross-curricular projects here at Utica. She directs our NASA Community College Aerospace Scholars Program, known as NCOS, and has co-taught an innovative course on bioethics, which is what she's here to share with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephanie Burks.
Good afternoon. Is it on? Let's try again. Oh, there we go. Good afternoon. All right, so it is my absolute pleasure to talk about a course that Dan and I worked together in developing, and we implemented this past spring. And so this particular course was a culmination of a lot of conversations that happened between me and Dan. Just science and humanities kind of come together more often than you would believe. And so there were a lot of lunchtime conversations about what students may or may not have said in class. A lot of things kind of came up, but the real drive behind what we were talking about and where this course came from was the epidemic. And not only the epidemic, but the vaccination that happened as a result of that. And so, especially on this campus as a biology instructor, when flu season comes around, I like to encourage my students to go get the flu shot. Go get the flu shot. And I would hear from my students, Ms. Burks, I'm not getting the flu shot. The flu shot gives you the flu. The flu shot does this, the flu shot does that. And a lot of the basis of where their responses came from conversations with family members, conversations at church, conversations at the dinner table. But a lot of the conversations weren't necessarily based on science. And I am telling my students all the time, I am not here to make you into a scientist. That would absolutely make my heart well. But what I do want to do is make sure that you're able to sift through the plethora of information that is available to us now. Social media, the internet has been a wonderful thing, but it has also been a very interesting thing, especially when it came to the COVID epidemic and the supplementary vaccine. I had students to tell me that they were not going to take the vaccination, which is absolutely fine with me, but they would see things on social media and say, well, Ms. Burks, they said if my blood type was type A, I wouldn't have to take the vaccine. Or if they told me if I just drank a whole lot of orange juice, I'd be fine and I'd never get COVID. And I think this epidemic was the great equalizer. And it allowed us to be able to really talk about what especially this student population has already experienced as far as apprehension about medicine, apprehension about science, apprehension about scientific research. And a lot of the basis with apprehension came, one, from not knowing all the way, but also just from the relationship that has historically existed between science and especially the Black community. And so those are things that are absolutely positively worth talking about. I never wanted to discourage the conversation. It's a worthy conversation, and some of the apprehensions are based on that. And so that was one of the driving forces between Dan and I kind of getting this particular course together. And so when you talk about bioethics, you talk about morality. right? And you talk about the ability to treat one person the same as the next person, no matter their color, no matter their religion, no matter their socioeconomic status. And so this particular course, Introduction to Bioethics, was a biology course for those students that would need that biology or that science course. But then it also, we were able to list it as a philosophy course. So if you had students that perhaps needed a humanities credit or something to that effect, they would be able to do that because there was a good mixture of both in this course. And so our topics, we talked about a lot, y'all. So we talked about Henrietta Lacks and informed consent and what that looked like. We had a really great discussion about what bioethics looked like and what the basis of bioethics was. There was a lot of discussion regarding reproductive health, reproductive technology, stem cell research, cloning, gene editing. And one of the wonderful things about being able to co-teach this with Dan is we had the opportunity to take it from a number of different areas and different sides as well. And so there were wonderful conversations. We had a book that we based this course on. So there was reading, there were a ton of writing prompts for our students as well. And there were wonderful discussions. I think once a week, there was a conversation about Michael Jackson being cloned. So that always sparked a good conversation, but we were able to use the book. We were able, because of Dan's connections, to use a number of speakers as well. We tried to give our students as much information as possible. Again, never to sway them one way or another, but to really have some distinct discussions about things that our students are already talking about or they've seen on social media or somebody said something about, but a lot of it really did spark from that epidemic and, of course, the flu shot. So we had some speakers, and our speakers were absolutely fantastic. Our first speaker who spoke to us about an introduction into bioethics was Dr. Ralph Didlake. And of course, for those of you who are not familiar with him, he is the director of the Center of Bioethics and Medical Humanities at University of Mississippi Medical Center. He came in person, talked to our students, and really gave an introduction about what types of things you need to consider ethically when it comes to medicine and when it comes to science. We also had the opportunity to hear from Dr. Joan Harrell, who is at Auburn University, and she talked to our students about the Tuskegee, not experiment. That is, of course, one of the misnomers, but she did talk to us about what happened with that and a lot of the apprehension that certain populations have regarding medicine, regarding science and things of that nature. That situation is one of the first things that is brought up. And so one of the things we wanted to do was have someone who really looked into it, really studied it, to really clarify some misconceptions about that whole experience. Now the students were also able to participate in the Asylum Hill Forum. For those of you that are not familiar of what the Asylum Hill is it is an initiative that has happened at the University of Mississippi Medical Center that deals with bioethically moving grave sites. Because for those of you that don't know, in that same location existed an asylum. And so there were unmarked graves that exist on that land. And so thousands actually. And so there has been a huge initiative on ethically moving those particular graves, those bodies, and what that looks like bioethic wise, what that looks like from a UMC perspective, and what that looks like from descendants perspective. And so for that particular presentation, Dr. Didlake returned, of course, to speak on behalf of UMMC. And then we had an author, Linda Monk, as well, who spoke from another aspect of it. And there were some very good conversations that happened as a result of both of their presentations that allowed our students to really discuss what it means to be respectful of the dead and what ethical considerations have to happen if you want to move somebody or bodies from one area to another, and how much time do you have to put into finding their descendants and what that looks like. And so that particular forum did spark a lot of conversations. We had some students that were involved in that, in presenting the speakers. And so our students were active participants. They came up with questions beforehand and were able to be active participants into that particular forum. And one of the good things with this first kind of student cohort is that Dan and I were very familiar with them and they were very comfortable with us. And so there were a lot of discussions that were able to happen to really kind of explore what that means to be part of the Utica campus, what that means to be African American in Mississippi, what that means to be a woman and African American in Mississippi, what that means to exist in the South, what that means to be from a certain socioeconomic or educational vantage point. And so our conversations a lot of times really allowed the students to take those kind of things into consideration, which is exactly what should happen. And so, you know, when we talk about health disparities, we talk about food deserts, and we talk about things like what SIP culture is trying to alleviate in these particular areas. And so our students, you know, young people a lot of times are very, it's me, you know, it's me, it's me, it's me. And I think these kind of conversations had them thinking about their grandmamas who probably have diabetes and high blood pressure, or one of the conversations dealt with reproductive justice and reproductive health. And so although these young people were familiar with the Pink House, they weren't familiar with the hub that Mississippi kind of stood in the marking of reproductive justice and what reproductive justice really means. One of the things that we did do was we studied that in different areas of the country. So we looked at what that looks like in Mississippi. We looked at what that looked like in California. We looked at what that looked like in New York. And one of the things we also took into consideration was the average educational level of the persons that live in that area, the average salary someone would make, and all of those things kind of played into it. And when they were able to kind of look at different areas of the nation and of the country, they were able to see how more than just how several things would probably shape outcomes, especially when you are talking about health disparities of many, many levels. Students were very surprised to hear that a lot of times medical school students like to come to Mississippi. And they like to come to Mississippi because they know they're going to see some of everything, because we are inherently unhealthy. And so you will see a 20-year-old on dialysis because of the inability for us to have equitable access to health care. And so when they talk about grandmama and mama having diabetes or high blood pressure, they also know young people that have diabetes and high blood pressure. And we talk about how their access to food, fresh food, is Dollar General down the street, right? They talk about how they go to Whole Foods, and Whole Foods chicken costs, you know, $20, but you can go to Piggly Wiggly and you can get a pick five for $20. And those type of things make a difference, and seeing where those inequities exist that make a difference. And groups like SIP Culture, who are taking it upon themselves to alleviate those inequities, make a difference. And then we did, on the science side, we did a sea urchin lab. And so as we were talking about reproductive justice, reproductive health, we wanted to talk about reproduction. And so why not talk about embryology? And so one of the ways that students were able to very quickly see what the time from fertilization till development looked like was with sea urchins. And so we did a sea urchin lab, God bless it. And so our sea urchin lab, for those of you who aren't familiar, humans have about 200 different cells in their body. Sea urchins have about 10 to 15. And so you're able to see from fertilization, and you're able to very quickly see the embryological development of that. And we do that because for the first trimester, we all kind of look the same, whether it's a human, a pig, a fish, or whatever, right? So embryologically, we kind of develop the same until we start, spearing off into whatever organism we are. And so this gave them the opportunity, for one, to get in the lab, of course, but for two, to really see what happens when sperm and egg come together. The same thing that happens with the sea urchin is the same thing that happens as humans develop as well. I will tell you, this was a lesson learned. So the next time we do this, we will be very prepared. Shout out to Dan, who kept them alive long enough to be able to even attempt this experiment. And so these are some of our students that are going about this sea urchin lab. For those of you that don't understand, so we have a male and a female, but we don't know who's who. And so you inject them with a solution. And if you inject them in a solution, they are either going to produce egg or they are going to produce sperm. And that lets you know who's who. And so once they do that, we're able to fertilize them. And so once we're able to fertilize them, we're able to look at the fertilization happening, because it happens so fast. And so some of our students were a little squeamish, but they got over it really, really quickly. And so we're attempting to collect. And so I think this plop right here is sperm right here. And so they're injecting to see what they're able to collect from the sea urchins. And so here we go again. Of course, they're looking at me. I don't know what I'm saying, but here we are. And so these are sea urchins. We learned very quickly that there has to be a very particular way to store sea urchins. So that was a lesson learned too. That's what science is. And so shout out to Dan, who hooked up a whole pseudo aquarium in no time. And so this is a particular sea urchin that is making some lovely eggs that are developing. And so this allowed them to really understand what it looks like when fertilization happens. I think there's a lot of misconception on that as well. And so I think it's very important for our students to be able to see what happens when the sperm and the egg come together and have some real conversations, and not too real, but real conversations just about embryologically, developmentally, fertilization-wise, what happens. But overall, as far as this course goes, it was a great experience. It facilitated a lot of conversation. There were students that asked some very thought-provoking questions, and I think that's what you want when you teach classes like this. You want your students to be able to go to their moms and their grandmoms and things of that nature and talk about what they see every day, either on social media or anything to that effect. So we're grateful for the opportunity to do this. Hopefully we'll be able to do it in the spring with some slight modifications. This first time around, we had to kind of adjust and readjust, which was absolutely fine because it was a joy to do. It was a joy to experience as well. And so this is what the fertilization looks like. And in the midst of this, I do want to thank you all for the opportunity. I want to thank Dan for even bringing up the idea. One thing about Dan, once he says it, it's going to be a done deal. And so I'm grateful for that opportunity as well. And I'm grateful for Dan and Jean and what they are doing on this campus to bring notoriety to this campus. And thank you all for your time. Well, thank you all so much. If you go to the Hinds website and you look up biology, I'm the curriculum coordinator for biological sciences, so you can email me there. But my email address is Stephanie, STEPHANIE .burks@hindscc.edu, and please feel free to contact me. And thank you so much.